Ronald Reagan is often remembered as the 40th President of the United States, but there's so much more to his story. Born in Tampico, Illinois, in pretty humble circumstances back in 1911, Reagan's journey was anything but ordinary. He went from playing football and acting in college to starring in over 50 Hollywood films. During World War II, he wanted to serve overseas like many other celebs, but ended up making patriotic films instead. Even though he didn't get to see active duty, he still played a part, keeping the home front morale up and all that. But Reagan wasn't just an actor, he had this burning political ambition. So he switched from being a Democrat to a Republican in the early 60s. He just didn't see eye to eye with the Dems on stuff like racial segregation and welfare policies. After serving as president of the Screen Actors Guild and then as governor of California, he took on the big job in 1980 as President of the United States. And man, did he make his mark. Reagan was all about this idea of limited government and fiscal responsibility. But what really set him apart was his leadership during the Cold War. Ever heard of the great communicator? That was Reagan. He had this way with words, rallying support for his policies, both at home and on the global stage. Remember that iconic moment at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin? Reagan straight up challenged the Soviet Union's General Secretary, Mikhail Gorbachev, to tear down the wall. That was a bold move, and it symbolized Reagan's commitment to freedom and peace. His strategy of beefing up the military while also engaging in diplomatic talks played a big part in ending the Cold War. And let's not forget about his domestic reforms, like tax cuts and deregulation. Love him or hate him, Reagan left a lasting impact on American politics and the world stage. Ronald Reagan's presidency was marked by several pivotal moments that shaped both domestic and international affairs. Elected at the age of 69 in 1981, Reagan became the oldest man to assume the presidency at the time, defeating Democratic incumbent Jimmy Carter with a solid majority of the votes. One of Reagan's earliest triumphs came with the release of the 52 American hostages held in Iran for 444 days. Unlike his predecessor, Reagan's firm stance signaled a new era of American leadership, prompting the Iranian authorities to act swiftly and release the hostages shortly after Reagan's inauguration. However, Reagan's presidency was not without challenges. In March 1981, just 69 days into his first term, Reagan survived an assassination attempt by John Hinckley Jr. Despite being shot and wounded, Reagan displayed remarkable resilience and recovered to continue his duties as president. Another significant event during Reagan's tenure was the 1981 strike by the Professional Air Traffic Controllers Organization, PATCO. Reagan's decisive response to the strike, declaring it a violation of legislation and subsequently terminating the employment of striking workers, sent a clear message about his commitment to upholding public safety and the rule of law. Reagan's nomination of Sandra Day O'Connor as the first woman to serve on the Supreme Court underscored his commitment to diversity and equality in the judiciary. O'Connor's confirmation by a unanimous vote in Congress reflected widespread bipartisan support for Reagan's choice. Economically, Reagan faced the daunting task of combating high inflation and interest rates, as well as addressing the fallout from previous fiscal mismanagement. His policies, collectively known as Reaganomics, aimed to stimulate economic growth through increased defense spending, tax cuts, reduced social service spending, and deregulation. Despite initial challenges, including a sharp rise in unemployment and business failures, Reagan's economic policies eventually laid the groundwork for sustained economic expansion and prosperity in the years to come. Reagan's presidency was defined by a mix of triumphs and challenges, but his unwavering leadership and commitment to conservative principles left a lasting impact on American politics and society. During Ronald Reagan's presidency, he faced significant economic and foreign policy challenges, along with implementing a series of landmark legislative initiatives. In January 1983, the official unemployment rate peaked at 11.5 million, leading to a rise in Reagan's disapproval rating. In response to the economic downturn, Reagan pursued a mix of fiscal and monetary policies aimed at stimulating growth. He lowered interest rates and championed legislation such as the Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981, which enacted substantial tax cuts, including reducing the top marginal tax rate from 70% to 28%. Additional tax reforms were passed, such as the Tax Equity and Fiscal Responsibility Act of 1982 and the Tax Reform Act of 1986, which overhauled the tax code. Reagan's economic policies also included international initiatives, such as the Free Trade Agreement with Canada, laying the groundwork for the later North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. These measures contributed to a resurgence in consumer spending and increased domestic revenues, bolstering the economy. However, Reagan's presidency was also marked by tragedy, notably the bombing of the US Marine barracks in Beirut, Lebanon, on October 23, 1983, which resulted in the loss of 241 Marines. This event prompted Reagan to reassess the deployment of US forces in Lebanon, ultimately leading to their withdrawal from the region. Reagan's commitment to social reform and fiscal responsibility was evident in his efforts to address issues such as social security and immigration. He led the push for social security reform to ensure its long-term solvency, and oversaw the expansion of the Medicare program to protect the elderly and disabled from catastrophic health costs. Moreover, Reagan advocated for greater decentralization of government power, promoting federalism and encouraging the transfer of responsibilities from the federal government to states. This approach aimed to empower states with more flexibility in managing their affairs, particularly in areas like business regulation and private sector initiatives. In one of his memorable speeches on March 8, 1983, Reagan famously warned against the aggressive impulses of the Soviet Union, referring to it as an evil empire. This speech underscored Reagan's steadfast stance against the spread of communism and his commitment to confronting totalitarian regimes. Overall, Reagan's presidency was defined by his bold leadership, economic reforms, and efforts to promote freedom and democracy both at home and abroad. Throughout Ronald Reagan's second term as president, he continued to navigate complex domestic and international challenges while leaving a lasting imprint on American politics and foreign relations. One of the key initiatives of Reagan's second term was the announcement of the Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, popularly known as Star Wars, in March 1983. This proposed space-based defense system aimed to deter potential attacks on the US by intercepting Soviet nuclear missiles. However, it also served as a strategic move to force the Soviets into a costly arms race, leveraging the perceived American advantage in space technology. In October 1983, Reagan authorized the invasion of Grenada by US forces, citing concerns for the safety of American medical students and to thwart a recent Cuban-backed coup. Despite condemnation from the United Nations, the invasion was widely supported by many Americans and successfully achieved its military objectives. Reagan's resounding victory in the 1984 presidential election, securing 58.8% of the popular vote and 525 electoral votes, reflected widespread public endorsement of his leadership. His landslide win against Democratic challenger Walter Mondale demonstrated his enduring popularity and political prowess. In April 1986, Reagan underscored his commitment to combating terrorism with Operation El Dorado Canyon, a long-distance air raid targeting Libya in response to its involvement in terrorist activities. The operation aimed to deter Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi's support for various terrorist groups across Europe. Reagan's foreign policy achievements were highlighted by his series of summits with Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev between 1985 and 1987. These meetings culminated in the signing of the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty in December 1987, marking a significant step toward reducing nuclear tensions between the US and the Soviet Union. However, Reagan's administration was not without controversy, notably the Iran-Contra affair. Revelations of arms sales to Iran and diversion of funds to Nicaraguan Contras led to resignations and dismissals within his administration. Despite Reagan's claim of unawareness, the scandal tarnished his presidency's final years. In retrospect, Ronald Reagan's second term was characterized by both triumphs and challenges, showcasing his leadership style and shaping American foreign policy for years to come. In February 26, 1987, the Tower Commission's report found no evidence directly implicating Reagan in the Iran-Contra affair. However, it did highlight the consequences of his administration's hands-off approach to government agencies, which indirectly contributed to the actions taken. On June 12, 1987, Reagan delivered a historic speech at the Brandenburg Gate in West Berlin, famously urging Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev to tear down this wall. Known as the Great Communicator, Reagan had a knack for clarity and directness in his speeches, leaving no doubt about his intentions or stance on various issues. Reagan's straightforward communication style resonated not only with the American people, but also with international leaders like Gorbachev. Their negotiations ultimately led to significant reductions in both nations' nuclear arsenals, paving the way for improved relations and the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union. Reagan's foreign policies and economic reforms created conditions that the USSR couldn't keep up with, leading to its eventual collapse. His leadership during this pivotal period reshaped the global economy and geopolitical landscape, solidifying his legacy as a transformative figure in history. In 1993, Reagan's health began to decline due to Alzheimer's disease, which he courageously disclosed to the public in 1994. He passed away on June 5, 2004, leaving behind a legacy of toughness, anti-terrorism efforts, support for Israel, military rebuilding, economic reforms, and the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. Reagan's greatest achievement, perhaps, was his strategic maneuvering that led to the Soviet Union's downfall, ultimately freeing millions from communist rule. His legacy endures as a testament to his leadership and vision for a world of freedom and democracy. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and feel free to leave us your comments and show ideas.